In the bitter winter of 1873, whispers spread through Milwaukee's German immigrant quarter about a peculiar child named Emma Richter, only 11 years old. Pale, soft-spoken, and unassuming, Emma possessed abilities that defied explanation. She could instantly tell the day of the week for any date in history, repeat entire conversations verbatim after hearing them once, and recall the precise number of steps between nearly every building in her neighborhood. What modern science might identify as a rare neurological phenomenon, the people of 1873 interpreted as either divine intervention or something far darker. At first, her talents were seen as curiosities, but when Emma began unveiling hidden secrets, predicting accidents, and recounting private details of crimes no one believed she could have witnessed, admiration turned into fear. Within months, 3 men were dead, 1 family had abandoned their home in the night, and Emma herself vanished without explanation. The only trace she left behind was a small leather notebook filled with pages of numbers that no one dared attempt to decipher. Before we continue with Emma's chilling story and the web of betrayal she uncovered in Milwaukee's German quarter, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. We share haunting historical mysteries every week. And let us know in the comments where you're listening from. These stories are closer to home than you might think. In 1873, Milwaukee's German district was alive with the hum of breweries, the scent of fresh bread, and the sound of German mingling with English in the sharp Wisconsin air. Nearly 8,000 immigrants had built their own little Bavaria on the shores of Lake Michigan, complete with beer gardens, family bakeries, and familiar old-world customs transplanted into American soil. Men found steady work in breweries like Prieslitz and Best, while their wives tended small gardens reminiscent of the Rhineland. Hinrich and Greta Richter, who had emigrated from Bavaria in 1861 with their infant daughter, fit neatly into this hard-working community. Hinrich earned his living as a brewmaster at Kellner Brewery, while Greta supplemented the household income with laundry and mending, working by candlelight long after Emma had gone to bed. Yet Emma was far from ordinary. She had been born prematurely, during the family's harsh Atlantic crossing, so fragile the ship's doctor doubted she would live. But survive she did, though always thin, pale, and wide-eyed, her grey gaze fixed with unnerving attentiveness on the world around her. Even as a toddler, she seldom cried. Instead, she sat quietly, watching and listening with uncanny focus. By 4, her parents realized something was different. Emma could repeat conversations from memory days after hearing them, mimicking voices and inflections perfectly. She counted everything, the stitches in her mother's sewing, the steps to the bakery, the minutes between brewery whistles. When her father introduced her to arithmetic, she absorbed it instantly, solving equations in her head faster than he could write them. At first, the German community regarded her with mixed feelings. Some were proud of the gifted child, while others felt uneasy. Old Mrs. Brennan would cross herself whenever Emma's cool, calculating eyes settled on her. But yet Father Koller, the stout parish priest, insisted Emma's gift was from God, a sign of divine wisdom among them. Then came the winter of 1872, the harshest in memory, so bitter that Lake Michigan froze solid for the first time in decades. Families struggled to keep warm, while brewery workers crowded around stoves, their breath visible indoors. It was in this isolating cold that Emma's abilities began to turn unsettling. She had taken to sitting by the kitchen window, silently, observing her neighbors' routines. But she did more than watch. She recognized patterns. Mr. Kruger's walk to the brewery was always 247 steps, except on Wednesdays, when it stretched to 284. Mrs. Fisher hung her laundry in a precise order, unless her husband stayed late at the mill. At first, her observations seemed like the odd fixations of a strange child. But when Emma began to speak her conclusions aloud, the unease grew. The true shift from curiosity to dread came on a gray February morning in 1873. Emma sat at the kitchen table, quietly eating her breakfast, when she suddenly looked up and announced, with chilling certainty, "Mr. Dietrich will not return from the brewery today. He will die at exactly 14 minutes past 2. Greta froze, nearly dropping the lunch pail in her hand. Emma, dear God, what a dreadful thing to say. Why would you think such a thing? Emma's pale gray eyes never wavered from her mother's face. He has been drinking from the small brown bottle for 17 days. Yesterday he drank 3 times his usual amount. His steps were uneven 251 instead of 244. When patterns shift more than 10%, something significant always happens. Within 72 hours, he's changed by 12. The outcome is certain. The calculation is simple. Hinrich, halfway into his heavy wool coat, paused and stared at his daughter, silent, stunned, and afraid. Jon Dietrich had always been fond of drink, though no more than half the men who filled Milwaukee's German Quarter with song and smoke. What unsettled his neighbors wasn't his habit, but the strange notion whispered in the Richter household. Emma, the quiet, pale-eyed child, had been measuring his steps and tallying his cups with the precision of an accountant. And, worse, that she had foretold his very death with a certainty that froze her parents' blood more than the February winds. "You mustn't say such things," Emma Hinrich warned sternly at the breakfast table. "It isn't proper for a child to speak of death." Emma only lowered her head, buttering her bread without protest. Yet her silence pressed upon her parents heavier than words, and they exchanged uneasy glances over her bent figure. They had long grown accustomed to her unusual observations. But this prediction felt darker, sharper, like a knife drawn too close to the skin. That same afternoon, at 14 minutes past 2, Jon Dietrich collapsed in the malt room of the brewery. The doctor wrote heart failure on the report, a result of years of heavy drink. Those who found him swore he had seemed nervous and erratic in the weeks leading up to it. Yet what they could not shake was the uncanny timing. Emma's prophecy had struck true to the very minute. The story spread like smoke through the tight-knit community. Some scoffed and muttered about coincidence, But others remembered the watchful girl with the calculating eyes, and began to wonder what else she might know. The Richter family soon found themselves followed by whispers in the marketplace and suspicious glances on the walk to church. Even Father Koller, who had once praised Emma's sharpness as a gift from God, now seemed troubled. When Hinrich sought counsel after Sunday Mass, the priest's warmth had cooled to unease. "Perhaps, my friend," he said in his heavy Bavarian accent, "it would be best if the girl spent less time peering from windows and more time in prayer. The Lord grants gifts, yes, but even the innocent can be turned by darker forces." That suggestion unsettled Hinrich more than he cared to admit. A man of brewing and barley more than faith. He preferred reason over mystery, but even he could not dismiss his daughter's chilling accuracy. That evening he sat Emma down. "Tell me the truth," he said. "How did you know about Mr. Dietrich?" Emma lifted her gray eyes, calm as ever. "I watch, I count, I remember. His drinking rose by 37% over 17 days, while his meals lessened by about 1/5. A body his age and weight cannot endure such strains. Failure was only a matter of time. I calculated when it would come." Hinrich's stomach sank. She spoke not like a child, but like a physician or something more unnatural. "But Emma," he pressed, "how could you possibly know so much about him?" Her reply was simple. "Because I see everything, Papa. Everyone, every day, every pattern." And then, almost innocently, she added, "Do you want me to tell you the other calculations I've made?" Hinrich shook his head quickly, afraid of what he might hear. That night, as he tucked her beneath the quilts, he felt the weight of something far beyond childhood curiosity hanging over their home. Outside, the snow muffled the streets of the quarter, turning the city into a quiet world of secrets. In her bed, Emma's mind ticked on like a clock, working through its endless patterns, calculating probabilities no child should carry. In the weeks that followed Dietrich's death, the neighborhood air shifted neighbors, watching neighbors, wondering who Emma might observe next. She remained at the kitchen window, her sharp eyes tracking every movement outside. Once their pride, she was now their source of fear. While other children laughed in the narrow brick-lined streets, Emma sat apart, lost in her calculations. Greta began to notice her daughter's reports growing more detailed and more disturbing. Casually, Emma would remark that Mrs. Weber had been visiting Mr. Kellner every Tuesday for 6 weeks, or that the Schneiders buried something wrapped in cloth in neat rows behind their garden each Sunday after service. When asked how she could possibly know, Emma's reply was chillingly simple. People think they are secret, but they repeat patterns like numbers. Mrs. Weber says she visits her sister, but her steps count to 127 instead of 349. The Schneiders dig at precise intervals, 73 centimeters apart. They think no one sees, but I always do. That night, Hinrich told his wife in hushed tones, "This cannot go on. She is not acting like a child anymore. No child should notice such things or speak of them without feeling." Greta, trembling as she sewed his shirt, whispered, I'm afraid, to Hinrich. Not of Emma herself, but of what the neighbors will think. They are already watching us. Mrs. Brennan had crossed the street the previous day, rather than meet Emma's eyes. Father Koller, too, had kept his distance, avoiding the Richter home ever since young Jens' death. Their unease proved justified when, 3 days later, Emma made yet another unsettling declaration. She was at the kitchen table, helping her mother peel potatoes, when her hand stilled. That familiar look of calculation overtook her features. "Tomorrow at precisely 11 o'clock," she said calmly, "Mrs. Weber will be discovered. Her husband will find her with Mr. Kellner in the brewery office. Violence will follow." Greta's paring knife slipped from her fingers. "Emma, 9 years old, you mustn't say such terrible things," she whispered. But Emma spoke with the same crisp assurance she used for arithmetic. "For 6 weeks, Mrs. Weber has been arriving 7 minutes earlier each time. Mr. K has stayed 33 minutes later each evening. And tomorrow, Mr. Weber's horse will force him home 47 minutes early. She is developing lameness in her left foreleg. I have tracked her gait for 11 days. These 3 variables converge tomorrow." Hinrich, standing in the doorway, felt his chest tighten. His daughter was not simply watching their neighbors, she was foretelling their fates with chilling precision. "Emma," he asked, voice hoarse, "how do you know about Weber's horse?" "I count her steps when they pass. On March 1st, she favored her right legs 53% of the time. Today, 68. Tomorrow, it will be severe enough to shorten the delivery route." And just as she said, the following day unfolded. In grim detail, Wilhelm Weber came upon his wife Anna in the arms of brewery owner Ernst Kellner. The quarrel left Kellner with a broken nose and cracked ribs. While Anna endured a beating so severe Dr. Müller had to be summoned, the scandal shook the German quarter to its core. But yet more unsettling than the violence was the truth that a pale child had described the entire sequence beforehand. Whispers spread quickly. Emma Richter had foreseen not only Jon Detrick's death, but now this shameful affair as well. Suspicion fell heavy on the family. Friends avoided them at church. Children were kept away from their yard, and even shopkeepers served the Richters curtly, as though afraid. At the brewery, Hinrich felt eyes upon him, his position now precarious. Kellner himself, nursing injuries, made it clear the Richters were unwelcome at company gatherings. Emma, however, seemed untouched by the hostility. Each day she sat with her small leather-bound journal, filling page after page with rows of figures, charts, and notations her parents dared not read. They glimpsed diagrams of human movement, tables of sequences, and careful maps of their neighborhood, marked with measurements. To them, the sight of their 11-year-old bent in such relentless calculation brought a nameless dread as spring crept into Milwaukee. The family's isolation deepened. Children no longer walked past the house. Father Koller limited himself to stiff church greetings. Shopkeepers grew colder still. Strangely, Emma seemed to thrive in solitude, her sharpened focus pulling hidden patterns from the lives around her dot. Only Dr. Friedrich Müller, The community physician responded with curiosity rather than fear. Trained in Berlin, he had studied peculiar cases before, and when Hinrich, desperate, sought his counsel, the doctor agreed to examine the girl. On a grey, rainy morning, Emma sat in Dr. Muller's office above the Water Street Pharmacy. She answered his questions with perfect detail, her grey eyes distant, as though fixed on invisible equations. "Your father tells me you can foresee events," Dr. Mueller said in his accented English. "How do you manage this?" Emma's voice was even by observing patterns. "People imagine their choices are random, but they follow sequences. When enough data accumulates, the future becomes clear." "Give me an example," the doctor urged. Emma opened her journal and flipped through its columns. "Mrs. Brennan thinks she hides her secret well, but her behavior is precise. For 8 weeks, every Tuesday and Friday, at exactly 3:15, she has walked to the church. The pattern is unmistakable. Instead of entering the church for prayers, the widow continued past the doors and slipped into the rectory, where she remained exactly 43 minutes. Father Kerr's habits, too, had altered in subtle but measurable ways. He now purchased more candles and wine than before, and on Tuesdays and Fridays his evening devotions lasted on average 17 minutes longer than usual. The pattern, Emma explained, was statistically significant. Dr. Muller felt his chest tighten as he realized what the girl was implying about the priest and the widow. The suggestion itself was scandalous enough, but the cold, systematic manner in which Emma had recorded her observations troubled him even more deeply. "How long have you been watching people like this?" he asked. "Always," Emma replied, without hesitation. "Since I was very little. I only began the calculations once I learned mathematics. Then the patterns became easier to see." After examining her, Dr. Muller spoke quietly with Heinrich and Greta Richter. His training told him her abilities were neurological, not supernatural. But he had no true framework to explain what he had just witnessed. "Your daughter's mind works differently," he told them. "She processes information in a way that is mechanical, precise. In my opinion, it is medical, not the other things people whisper about." Yet even his scientific view did little to ease the dread that her predictions inspired. 2 days later, Emma made another announcement. "There will be a fire at the Zimmerman home Sunday night," she said calmly. "It will begin at 8:47, spread 2-3 neighboring houses, and Mr. Zimmerman will not survive." Hinrich felt the familiar chill. "Emma, you must not speak like this. How could you possibly know such a thing?" She opened her leather-bound journal. "Mr. Zimmerman has been drinking lamp oil mixed with whiskey for 12 days. I saw him buy both in amounts far above normal use. His wife left for Chicago yesterday. Wives often leave just before a serious domestic event. The chimney is structurally unsound, which I deduced from the angle of the smoke and the soot patterns. Probability of fire, 93%. Greta wept softly. The way her daughter discussed tragedy, detached, clinical, as if it were only a calculation, her more than the rumors of witchcraft ever had. That night, Hinrich made a choice he would regret forever. He decided to warn Franz Zimmermann, hoping that if disaster was prevented, perhaps Emma's abilities could be seen as useful rather than cursed. He found Zimmermann at the brewery on Saturday evening, reeking of alcohol and lamp oil. Desperate warning was met with mocking laughter and crude remarks about the devil child who thinks she knows everything. Still, something in Heinrich's urgency seemed to break through Zimmermann's haze, and he promised half-jokingly to be more cautious with his lamps. The next evening, unseasonably warm with a dry west wind, fire burst from the Zimmermann home at precisely 8:47. The flames spread so quickly that 3 adjacent houses were consumed before the volunteer firemen could gain control. Franz Zimmermann's body was discovered in the kitchen, overcome while trying to fight the inferno. The exactness of Emma's prediction shook the German quarter to its core. Workers at the brewery had seen Hinrich's attempt to warn Zimmermann, and soon word spread that the girl had foretold not only the fire, but the very minute it would ignite. What had once been uneasy whispers turned into open fear. Family found themselves shunned completely. Yet Emma herself was untouched by the growing hostility. To her, the fire was merely another data point to record. She noted the accuracy, compared it to her calculations, and adjusted her formulas. Then she moved on to fresh patterns without emotion. The days that followed became heavy with fear and suspicion. 3 families, Braun, Kohlhaas, and Steiner, had lost their homes. The community scrambled to shelter the displaced, all while glancing warily at the pale child who had predicted it with such impossible precision. Heinrich's position at the brewery soon collapsed under the weight of gossip. Colleagues avoided him. Conversations stopped when he entered a room. Ernst Kellner, still bearing scars from Wilhelm Weber's attack, made it plain that the Richters were no longer welcome at brewery gatherings. Meanwhile, Emma filled page after page in her journal. The equations had grown more elaborate, her charts resembling probability matrices that mapped entire chains of events weeks in advance. Greta no longer dared to look inside, too afraid of discovering what grim fates her daughter might be calculating for their neighbors, or even their own family. The little girl who had once been her joy now seemed cold, mechanical, incapable of compassion. The breaking point came one Tuesday morning in late April. Emma, seated as always by the kitchen window, watching the street with unblinking focus, suddenly turned to her mother, her grey eye sharp, relentless, calculating fixed on Greta with unsettling intensity. Greta was kneading bread when Emma's soft voice cut through the kitchen air. "Mama, today's pattern is broken." Greta's hands faltered, her fingers sinking into the dough as a tremor passed through her. "What do you mean, child?" Emma opened her leather-bound notebook, its pages filled with endless rows of numbers and strange markings. 4-11 Tuesdays in a row. Mrs. Brennan has gone to the rectory at precisely 3:15. Today she left at 2:47 and walked toward the river. Her steps were shorter, her breathing uneven. That indicates distress likely fatal intent. The matter-of-fact way Emma spoke of their neighbor's possible suicide sent cold dread through Greta. "Don't speak so, Emma. Mrs. Brennan is a good woman. She would never." "The probability is 87%, Emma interrupted, flatly, as if reciting whether people who break long-standing routines while showing physical signs of anguish usually act within 4 hours. Mrs. Brennan's change occurred 43 minutes ago." Greta dropped the dough and rushed to the garden where Hinrik was, digging the spring soil. "You must come. Emma says Mrs. Brennan means to harm herself. We cannot wait." Hinrik's face tightened. The familiar heaviness of his daughter's strange abilities pressed against his chest, but he followed anyway. Back inside, Emma continued scribbling as though she were documenting an experiment. When asked, she repeated calmly, "Deviation by 28 minutes. Indicators, distress. Likelihood of self-destruction, 87%. Most Hinrik didn't waste another word. He left immediately, following the river path Emma had noted. And there, on the dock where fishing boats swayed, stood Margaret Brennan, staring into the black water with tears streaking her face. "Mrs. Brennan," Hinrik called gently. "Are you well?" She turned, startled. Her voice cracked. "Hinrik, why are you here? You seemed troubled." "I was worried." At that her composure broke. "I cannot carry the shame. Everyone whispers. They know. Father Koller says my feelings are sinful, but I cannot stop them. Better to die than live under such disgrace." Hinrik's blood ran cold. Emma had been right. For 2 hours he pleaded with her on that dock, urging her to see beyond shame, promising that gossip would fade. At last he walked her home alive. When he returned, exhausted, Emma was still writing. Without looking up, she said, "Outcome, changed intervention, altered the probability. I must revise my formula to account for interference." Hinrik stared, horrified. His daughter had predicted a suicide attempt before it happened, then treated his desperate rescue as a mere adjustment in her calculations. That night, as Emma slept peacefully in her narrow bed, Hinrik and Greta whispered the decision that had been building in their hearts. They could no longer remain in Milwaukee. Life among the German community had become unbearable under the shadow of Emma's predictions, and more frightening still was the detachment with which she regarded human suffering. They began making quiet plans to leave Wisconsin, but Emma had not finished. Her notebooks were filling with sprawling charts and coded sequences, tracking the movements of nearly every adult in the quarter. On the first day of May, 1873, Emma looked up from her journal with calm gray eyes and announced, "Papa, I've discovered a larger pattern. It explains everything." Hinrik, already fearing what was to come, sat heavily at the table. He knew the words his daughter was about to speak would shake the very foundations of their community. Emma flipped open her journal to a section dense with diagrams, coded notes, and carefully drawn maps. The pages looked less like the scribbles of a child and more like the work of a trained investigator. "For more than 2 years," she began, with her usual cold precision, I have tracked and documented the routines of 43 adults in this community. At first, I assumed the irregularities I noticed were mere chance. But after systematic analysis, I uncovered patterns that reveal something far darker: organized criminal activity. Hinrich's heart seized at her words. "Emma, what exactly are you saying?" Without hesitation, Emma pointed to her charts, speaking with the steady tone of a mathematics professor. 7 men have been gathering in secret every Wednesday at midnight in the basement of Kellner's brewery. Their movements are predictably identified them by studying the times they leave home, the routes they choose to avoid main streets, and the small but consistent lies they tell their families. She slid a hand across a map of the German quarter, each street carefully marked. Mr. Steinberg, for example, claims to work late on Wednesdays. Yet he leaves the mill with the other 6 men at the same precise moment each week. For 26 months, the pattern has held broken. Only by illness or family emergencies. Hinrich stared at the names scrawled in her neat handwriting. Wilhelm Huber, Franz Kellner, Hans Zimmermann, Otto Steinberg, Klaus Brennan, Gustav Wolf, Hermann Kruger. "Emma, how could you possibly know all this?" "I watch everything, Papa. Every night, every movement, every break from established behavior." Then she turned a page filled with lines of numbers and calculations. "But the meetings themselves are only part of what I have discovered. The evidence points to systematic theft. My estimates put the total at nearly $47,000 stolen from the brewery over the past 26 months. Hinrich. Hands shook. That sum was more wealth than most families in their neighborhood would ever see. "How could you calculate such a thing?" Emma answered with her usual clinical calm. "I compared reported production with actual output, cross-referenced port, ingredient purchases, delivery counts, and even waste disposal. The discrepancies revealed theft. Then I analyzed spending patterns. Each of the 7 men shows sudden increases in wealth that cannot be explained by their wages. Mr. Weber bought new furniture worth $300. Mr. Steinberg has been sending oversized packages to relatives in Germany. The evidence aligns. Hinrich realized the terrifying truth. His daughter had uncovered a conspiracy of theft hidden in plain sight. But Emma was not finished. The scheme required insight. Help someone with access to records and security arrangements. My calculations lead directly to Ernst Kellner, the brewery's owner, as the mastermind. The words struck Hinrich like a physical blow. Ernst Kellner, the very man who had been quietly pushing their family to the margins of the community, was at the center of it all. Emma met his eyes without flinching. "Papa, I am 96% certain of my conclusions. But there is more. Do you know why Mr. Kellner tries so hard to isolate us? Because he knows I observed. He has noticed me watching him. 3 weeks ago, he stood outside our house twice. In the night 17 minutes, each time calculating, I believe, whether I had uncovered his secret." Hinrich's chest grew tight with fear. His daughter's gift had not only exposed a criminal network, but placed her directly in danger. Emma closed the journal, her gray eyes unreadable. "Papa, my probability models show an 84% chance that they will act against us. The highest risk falls within the next 3 days. For the first time, Hinrich understood that Emma's predictions were not just about neighbors' secrets or moral failings. They were about survival. That very evening, he resolved to act. Carrying Emma's meticulous journal, he slipped away, under cover of darkness, to Dr. Müller, the physician, already unsettled by Emma's uncanny abilities, turned pale as he studied the evidence. "If this is accurate," he whispered, "we are looking at the largest theft ring Milwaukee has ever known. But more importantly, if Kellner suspects she knows, your family's lives are in jeopardy." Double quotes. Dr. Müller wasted no time calling upon his connections. He arranged for Hinrich to take an emergency position at a brewery far away in Minnesota. The cover story of sudden employment would allow them to vanish from Milwaukee before Kellner and his men could silence the one witness who had seen too much. They slipped away under cover of night, determined to escape before Emma's grim 72-hour forecast could come true. As Hinrich and Greta Richter packed the last of their belongings into Dr. Muller's wagon, Emma delivered one more unnerving calculation words that would stay with her father for the rest of his life. "Papa," she said with her eerie calm, "within 6 months, the scheme will be uncovered. Justice will find Mr. Kellner, but 3 of the 7 men will not live to see the end of it. The odds are certain." Hinrich's hands trembled as he lifted his daughter into the wagon. Even in their flight, Emma's mind was grinding out probabilities: betrayal, death, and justice. And, as always, she was right by the onset of winter. Federal authorities tore open the web of theft that had haunted Milwaukee's breweries. Kellner was dragged before the courts, convicted of stealing more than $50,000. 3 of his partners would never face a judge. Gone within weeks under strange and suspicious circumstances. But on that pitch-dark May night of 1873, as their wagon rattled down the cobblestone streets of the German Quarter, Hinrich thought only of how his child's gift had saved them from ruin, while also severing them forever from the only home they had known in America. By dawn on May 2nd, the Richter family had vanished. Neighbors were told by Dr. Müller that they had returned to Bavaria for urgent family business. Yet no ship manifests ever listed their names. The truth was more complex. The Richters had resettled in Minnesota, where Hinrich found steady work. At a small-town brewery in New Ulm, Greta stitched together a semblance of normal life again, but Emma remained unchanged. Her gray eyes still measured every human pattern, recording every behavior with merciless precision. Dr. Müller kept their secret, exchanging letters with the family for months. In one letter, he revealed that Emma had begun working with a local college professor, Dr. Hermann Weiss, a German immigrant who studied her condition with scientific curiosity rather than superstition. For the first time, Emma's strange powers were being framed as something to be studied, not feared. Then, in November of 1873, Hinrich wrote to Müller with chilling confirmation. Emma's prediction about the brewery ring had come to pass in every detail. Kellner sat in a prison cell. Wilhelm Weber, Kellner's closest ally, was found lifeless in what officials called suicide. Otto Steinberg perished in a so-called drunken mishap, and Hermann Kruger collapsed suddenly with what doctors described as a heart attack, though whispers suggested poison from hundreds of miles away. Emma had foreseen it all with frightening exactness. Milwaukee's German Quarter never fully forgot the scandal. While honest families rebuilt what corruption had rotted, the pale child who had predicted ruin and death became part of local folklore. Parents warned their children not to pry into dangerous knowledge. Adults whispered uneasily about what secret might yet linger behind their neighbors' doors. Even Father Koller, once convinced that Emma's gift was divine, later admitted to Dr. Muller that his faith had been shaken. Was this knowledge from God or a curse too heavy for human minds? And just when the neighborhood began to heal, a darker truth surfaced. In the spring of 1874, Dr. Muller wrote his final letter to the Richters. Federal investigators had examined Emma's abandoned journal and found something far beyond brewery theft. Page after page revealed meticulous charts and calculations made by of entire families in the immigrant community. Emma had tracked their movements, catalogued their habits, and even projected their futures. She had not only exposed a single conspiracy, she had been charting the destiny of an entire community. So, if this tale has chilled you, imagine what else Emma might have foreseen. Share this with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Tap the like button and subscribe, because this is only the beginning of the forgotten horrors buried in America's past. Federal agents, skilled in the art of criminal profiling, found themselves both impressed and unsettled by the depth of Emma's methods. Your daughter's intellect functions in ways even professionals might admire, Dr. Muller admitted. Yet I cannot deny my relief that she no longer resides in Milwaukee. The sharpness of her calculations and the certainty of her predictions hold a kind of knowledge I fear no community should ever carry. The final trace of Emma Richter in the historical record appears in the archives of Ulm Collegius Mathematica Department in 1875. Professor Hermann Weiss wrote that a remarkable pupil had displayed extraordinary gifts in statistical reasoning and the prediction of human behavior. Still, he noted, the family had once again chosen to move away for reasons left unstated. After that single entry, Emma faded from history as suddenly as she had vanished from Milwaukee on that fateful night in May of 1873. What became of the girl who could reduce human choices to numbers and probabilities remains a mystery. Some scholars suggest that families with children of rare abilities often cloaked themselves in secrecy, seeking protection, not only from exploitation by science, but also from fear and suspicion within their own communities. Emma's story is one of the rare instances where such abilities were recorded in enough detail for us to glimpse their reach and danger. Her case reminds us that the human mind remains our most enigmatic frontier, capable of talents that defy explanation and unsettle our sense of what intelligence truly is. In the 19th century, Emma's gift was seen by some as holy inspiration, by others as something dark and unnatural. Today, modern science can connect such phenomena to conditions like savant syndrome, autism spectrum variations, or even neurological anomalies that allow the brain to process reality with eerie precision. But perhaps not everything was revealed. Could Emma's skills have gone even further than what history preserved? Or was her silence and her disappearance part of the mystery itself? What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever encountered someone whose mind seemed to operate beyond ordinary limits? And if you enjoyed this unsettling glimpse into forgotten history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with fellow mystery lovers. Because sometimes the most disturbing truths are not born from ghosts or curses, but from the cold, relentless logic of numbers. Emma Richter's case reminds us that the secrets we think hidden may already be visible, waiting for someone with the right mind to see the pattern.